Hello, on today's show. Theresa May considers more sanctions against Russia. Fishermen aren't happy with the latest Brexit plans. And should new dads get more paternity leave? With me today, Anna Menon, Professor of Foreign Affairs, who runs the Brexit Analysis Unit, the UK in a changing world. Welcome to the programme.
Pleasure to be here.
First of all, Theresa May has been chairing a meeting of the government's National Security Council this morning, discussing what further measures, if any, should be taken against Russia for the nerve agent attack on Sergei Skripal and his daughter. Our diplomatic editor, James Landale, joins us. James, tell us about some of the measures that she could use.
Oh, there's lots of tools that the Prime Minister could deploy to ratchet up the pressure on Moscow. She could expel more diplomats. She could be much more explicit about the economic pressure that is going to be deployed on wealthy Russians who have links to the Kremlin, who are based here in the UK. There's a whole sort of, palette of things that she could do. But the impression I get is that there's a very live debate within government about how strongly, if at all, the government should respond to the latest retaliation. Because essentially what's happened so far is that there's been the ritual exchange of diplomats. The Russian diplomats are leaving today. We've seen some pictures of the coaches leaving. But there's a real debate, I think, within government that says this. On the one hand, yes, we should continue to respond to the Russians, and so we should look at the next phase of this process. Or others say, no, actually, is it more in Britain's strategic interest to keep this debate an international one, about maintaining the international pressure on Russia, rather than getting sucked into some kind of bilateral tit-for-tat row with the Russians? So it'll be very interesting to see which way they go.
Yes, as you say, it does look as if the government, particularly Boris Johnson, want cover at the very least from EU partners and from NATO, who've certainly shown solidarity, although there was some quibbling over the wording yesterday from the EU. Will they, these other organisations, actually exert any sanctions and measures themselves against Russia?
My own assessment is that I think it would be very, very hard to get specific new unanimous EU support for something like new sanctions. That's simply because there's not the appetite for it, or even before this crisis blew up, there was an appetite amongst some European countries, particularly the Italians and the Greeks and others, saying they want to try and weaken EU sanctions against Russia anyway. So I don't think that's what the British are asking for. I think what the British are saying is, look, this incident in Salisbury, that's just the version of Russia's aggression that's affected the United Kingdom. But look at this is a pattern of behaviour by Russia. Look at all these other threats to your own individual countries. What do you think you could do to put more pressure on Russia individually, unilaterally? Can we help you doing that? So in other words, we're not talking here about, agreeing to anything collectively, but in terms of, something that's going to be agreed in Brussels, but just getting other nations to say, actually, you know what, we think Russia is has stepped over a line here, and that this is what we must do in terms of putting pressure economically, putting pressure on cyber, and essentially, as one official said to me, making sure that in every single international forum, Russia feels more and more uncomfortable, more and more under pressure, so that in a few months' time, they think, actually, you know what, we overreached ourselves, we went too far.
Right. When might we hear about any new measures, if any?
Well, I mean, the NSC is meeting this morning. What normally happens after these events is, we get some form of a readout, sometimes through the Westminster lobby correspondence, just to give us an assessment of, what the NSC has been discussing. We also might get, I think, an update on where the investigation is, because quite often the NSC is obviously briefed on where that's going. So there might be more details on that. Also, what's going on in terms of the process of giving some samples to the chemical weapons watchdogs inspectors who began their work yesterday.
James Landale, thank you. And listening to that, do you think Theresa May should actually exert further sanctions, bearing in mind the rhetoric has been quite strong against Russia and its attack on British soil?
I agree with James that I think the danger with tit for tat is that Putin isn't the sort of guy who lets the other person have the last word. So there's a danger of escalation if we just keep ratcheting it up unilaterally. And I think we have to keep working through the multilateral fora. We have plenty of backing within the European Union at the moment, at least for a diplomatic position. There'll be no new sanctions. The EU has done all it's ever going to do now. I mean, remember, there are sanctions in place.
Yes.
But I think there's been an impressive show of Western unity over this. And we've got to really fight to keep that, because then, as James said, is when the Russians start to feel the heat. I think if we just keep doing small measures at home and the Russians retaliate, actually we're in danger of being outgunned if Putin's willing to go further than we are, and it might not achieve that much.
I mean, both Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn have said that we still need to engage with Russia, but having expelled the diplomats, what form does that take, that engagement?
Well, we haven't expelled all the diplomats, and it's a bit like if you think back to the Cold War. There was a conflict with Russia, but the channels of communication were kept open all along. And that's what international politics is like. You make your point, you've done something to displease us, but at the same time, there are all sorts of issues. We're still, I hope, talking about Syria behind the scenes. There are all sorts of international issues we need to be discussing with Russia, and completely cutting them off is not the way ahead, I don't think.
All right, well, let's leave it there for the moment, because we're going to move on to our daily quiz. And the cash-strapped parliamentary authorities have got into hot water for spending nearly £10,000. So our question for today is, what on? Is it A, a home cinema for John Bercow's apartment, the Speaker? B, money to stop the trees in Parliament's atrium from falling over? C, a relaxation room for stressed MPs? Or D, training for MPs on how to use Instagram? The mind boggles. Well, at the end of the show, Anna will give us the correct answer, I'm sure. Now, you may have heard the words Cambridge Analytica, Facebook and elections today and wondered what it's all about. Well, we'll try our best to explain. Cambridge Analytica is a political consultancy firm which is accused of using the data of 50 million Facebook members to influence the US presidential election in 2016. Last night, Channel 4 News aired a film showing an undercover reporter posing as a potential client from Sri Lanka, meeting Cambridge Analytica CEO Alexander Nix. Let's take a look.
And what we want to know is what is the expertise of the deep digging that you can do to make sure that the people know the true identity and secrets of these people.
We do a lot more than that. I mean, deep digging is interesting, but equally effective can be just to go and speak to the incumbents and to offer them a deal that's too good to be true and make sure that that's video recorded. These sorts of tactics are very effective. Instantly having video evidence of corruption, putting it on the internet, these sorts of things.
Well, that was Channel 4's film last night. Labour's Shadow Digital Minister Liam Byrne is here, and we've also been joined by the BBC's technology reporter Zoe Kleinman. Zoe, can you just bring us up to date with the story? We've seen an excerpt there about some of the practices of Cambridge Analytica, which they say were exaggerated, it was hyperbole. But what exactly has been going on with this company?
They deny all wrongdoings. We absolutely have to start by saying that. What they've been accused of is twofold. Number one is getting hold of an enormous amount of Facebook data, the personal data of 50 million users, and then using that data to target messages supporting Donald Trump in the run-up to the presidential election. Number two is they have been filmed saying that they are able to influence political elections by discrediting rivals, by doing things like setting up stings where they might be caught, in an apparent bribery situation.
Which is against the law, of course.
Which is, of course, against the law. Sending girls to politicians' houses, that sort of thing. Now, they say this has been taken out of context. They were playing along with the undercover reporters because they thought that they might be clients and that they didn't mean any of it, of course. But it has opened up enormous questions about what all of these companies are doing and how much influence they have.
Right, Liam Byrne, let's stick with the first point that Zoe makes, which is harvesting data, if you like. Harvesting data, which surely all political parties do when they hire consultants and they have election campaigns. They go quite aggressively after voters, particularly floating voters. Is this any different?
Yeah, it is different because they collected the data for one purpose and then reused it for something else. And I think the reason that we're all very concerned about this is that we know that it's not just bad companies at work in this space, there are bad countries as well. So we know Russia intervened in the American elections, we know they intervened in France, we know they intervened in Germany. There's a suspicion that they could have been up to no good in, for example, the Brexit referendum. Now, what we need to ensure is that there isn't some kind of unholy alliance between bad companies and bad countries. So we need to get to the bottom of this. And what we learned over the last couple of days is the Information Commissioner doesn't really have the power to get digital search warrants at the speed that she needs them in order to get the evidence they need. Now, we were promised some more laws on this last night. Actually, we've just heard this morning, about half an hour ago in the House of Commons, the Minister slightly backtracking from this and saying, oh, no, we didn't guarantee to equip the Information Commissioner with new laws in this data protection bill, we'll come back to you.
Right, so they're
we're a bit alarmed about
you
this.
don't think they're going to do that then, give them new powers?
I thought last night that they were, and now I'm sort of pretty alarmed they won't.
Right. I mean, can you explain how they got this Facebook data in the first place?
Yeah, and this is the slightly murky thing. So at the time when this happened, it was quite common practice. So a man who's a Cambridge academic called Alexander Kogan made a personality quiz that people could take on Facebook. And Facebook has a set of instructions, if you like, which is known as an API, which it gives to all developers so that their stuff will work on the Facebook platform. And at the time, it was set up as a default so that if anybody used an app, not only all of their data, but all of the data of their friends would also be collectible by the developer. This was common practice, okay? So what happened was this app was launched, the game, it was Guess Your Personality Type, you know, fun game. And it was played by about 270,000 people, the allegation goes. But in the playing of that, and their friend networks and everything else, it possibly reached up to 50 million users in terms of the data the app was able to harvest. Then what happened was the developer sold that data to Cambridge Analytica. So not only do we have a situation where Facebook's data should not have been sold on, but also a situation where it's not transparent. You know, it's worth saying Obama also has an app which he used to try and get himself re-elected during his last term as president, also used the same thing. But the app was, let's re-elect Obama. It was very obvious what you were doing, you know, playing a personality quiz. It's not obvious that you might be supporting Donald Trump.
Right. I mean, where should the boundaries be, though, Liam Byrne? Because we all know when we complete quizzes or we go shopping on the internet, there's a little box at the bottom that says, are you happy for this company to share your information? And you hope that in good faith, if you do not tick that box, your information won't be shared. Presumably, there are millions of people who tick that box thinking, well, nothing malign is going to happen to that information, or perhaps they don't really care. Is that where the problem lies?
No, the problem is twofold. So one, data was used in a way that it wasn't collected for. So in a sense, people were kind of misled when they offered their data in the first instance. The second real concern, though, is that Facebook say that they received assurances that the data was destroyed, and now it turns out that perhaps it wasn't. So there's a real question about who provides the oversight and who provides the guarantees that data is actually being used for the correct manner. And frankly, even the Secretary of State now describes this as a Wild West where there aren't any rules. And, you know, that's why we're saying, well, look, isn't it time to give the sheriff a bit more power to actually bring some order to this case?
Right, and we asked Cambridge Analytica for an interview, but no one was available. One of the slightly shadowy things that has developed is when the DCMS, the Department of Culture, Media and Sport Committee Chair Damian Collins tweeted that Facebook have confirmed that auditors and legal counsel acting on behalf of the company were in the offices of Cambridge Analytica last night until they were told to stand down by the Information Commissioner. What do you make of that?
I mean, it's very unusual and strange that the two hadn't been in touch, but I think it's good that Facebook is deferring to the UK authorities here. It's happening on UK soil and it should be the Information Commissioner's office's job, I would have thought. Right,
what's going to happen now, though, Liam Byrne? You would like new legislation, you would like more powers for the Information Commissioner, Elizabeth Denham. Would that do it?
There's three things that need to change. So the Information Commissioner needs more power. Second, we're proposing an amendment called the Honest Ads Act, which basically would mean that the Electoral Commission has got the power to find out who is paying for what ads for what purpose. At the moment, dark ads are perfectly possible. But, you know, the big change is that we need to bring the legislation for these social media firms up to date. At the moment, they're regulated by a law that was written in 2000 before they grew to the great size and scale that they are today. So we're also going to propose an amendment that sets a deadline for when the government needs to bring that legislation, frankly, into the 21st century.
Would you back that sort of legislation? I mean, do you think there's been widespread interference in the way it's been articulated in elections over the last few years?
It's very, very hard to say. I mean, what I would say is that the Digital Minister, Matt Hancock, has talked about these companies having a duty of care towards their users, and I would imagine a duty of care involves our data not being used for things we weren't told about initially, particularly when it comes to shaping our political opinions. I have to add that I think the best thing about this story is the fact that this Dr. Kagan at one point changed his name to Dr. Spector, which is just surreal.
And on that, we'll leave it. Thank you both very much. Now, this time yesterday, the Brexit Secretary, David Davis, was holding a press conference in Brussels to announce agreement on a transition deal with the EU, which covers the implementation period from next March until the end of 2020. Mr. Davis said it was a decisive step in the Brexit process.
the United Kingdom will be able to step out, sign and ratify new deals, new trade deals with old friends and new allies around the globe for the first time in more than 40 years. These will come into force when the implementation period is over, providing new opportunities for businesses across the United Kingdom and seizing one of Brexit's greatest opportunities.
Well, that was the Brexit Secretary, David Davis, yesterday. Let's get some reaction from you first, Anand. How big a moment was this, do you think? David Davis seemed to think it was. Was it?
It was certainly a big moment for a lot of companies in this country who'd been crying out for this agreement so they didn't have to trigger contingency plans. So in that sense, it was definitely a step forward. But, you know, to cite the old saying, nothing's agreed till everything's agreed.
Which
so
Michel Barnier said.
Absolutely. And I believe Jacob Rees-Mogg said yesterday as well. So both sides are citing that line. So there's a long way to go before this is all wrapped up and signed and sealed.
How much did the government give way, in your mind?
Well, there are some areas on the transition deal where they clearly gave way. So, for instance, the rights of EU citizens who arrived during transition. Initially, the Prime Minister said they won't have the same rights as EU citizens who arrived before Brexit Day. Now they will. And, of course, we're going to have to abide by new EU laws. So I think on transition, the government gave way on most of the points that the EU was insisting on, to be honest.
Did the EU give way as well?
No, I think the EU has given way on some of the withdrawal points. So on the rights of EU citizens, they backed off their initial demands. But on transition, the EU seems to have got pretty much what they wanted.
Were you surprised by the storm that seems to have been created over fishing rights?
Yes and no. I mean, there are lots of different constituencies involved in the Brexit vote, and fishing, of course, was something where the government had been saying quite early on, and Brexiters have said, we're going to reclaim our fishing waters. This is a direct and clear contradiction that affects specific people's lives. So in that sense, it was fairly predictable.
Right. Well, with us here in the studio to discuss all this, Conservative MP Nigel Evans and the Labour MP Alison McGovern. Welcome to both of you. Nigel Evans, let's pick up on the fishing rights. Take back control. Have the fishermen and people who wanted to take back control of British waters and fishing rights, have they been betrayed by this deal?
No, they haven't. I was just looking for Jacob Rees-Mogg and one of those trawlers over Anand's shoulder there. No, the reality is that we're going to be in no worse off position during the transition period. It could be better because it's going to be open to negotiation. And at the end of the period when we leave, so that's after the transitional period, then we will have taken back control of our waters. So one area where I find completely odd, though, is Nicola Sturgeon saying that this has let down the Scottish fishermen. Because, quite frankly, if we stuck with what Nicola Sturgeon wants, we'd be in the European Union for eternity, and we wouldn't have any control even in 2020 on our fishing waters.
But it's not just Nicola Sturgeon, is it? It's Tory MPs, Scottish Tories, who met with the Chief Whip and were told to sort of stop whining because it's not like fishermen are going to vote Labour. Is that the way to deal with your colleagues?
No, certainly not. And I know that they're meeting with the Prime Minister today, so that's how important that is being taken. They've met with Michael Gove as well. And we just want to make absolutely certain that in the whole mix we do, when we finally do leave the European Union after the transitional period, that we've got total control of our waters. We are leaving the common fisheries policy, and we will be able to get the very best deal for our fishermen.
I mean, do you accept, Alison McGovern? I mean, you very much are still behind the idea of remaining within the EU, but do you accept that this was a moment that some success and progress has been made?
Well, I think there's two problems with what's happened over transition. The first of those problems is that many of the big decisions are still being kicked down the road. So whether that's the position of Ireland or what our eventual relationship will be, we still don't know. So a lot of us talked about the importance of a transition a lot, you know, when the vote first happened, precisely for the reason that Anand mentioned earlier, which is that businesses would need a long lead-in to deal with whatever the eventual situation was. But if that long lead-in is still really a road to nowhere, what are we really talking about? You know, we still don't really know what our relationship is going to be. The second problem is, to be quite honest, you know, people like Nigel went round in 2016 telling people when we leave the EU, we'll take back control, we'll have control of fisheries, we'll have control of our borders. And now, you know, they're being told, actually, I'm terribly sorry, but, you know, that's not really what's on offer anymore. And I don't think that is good enough, really, for people in Britain, whether they voted leave or remain. You know, I think people were told they could have something, and now they're being told, actually, we're just going to have open borders. You know, it's not really fair on people, and I think that's a huge problem.
Nigel?
No, we've got a pragmatic approach to the negotiations, which is quite right. I thought it was rather bizarre to see Michel Barnier and David Davis standing behind that board full of sheets with a lot with green ink over it to show that where agreements had been made and some where agreements have still yet to happen. And I agree with Alison on this. If it is a road to nowhere, then I'd be totally opposed to it. But it is actually a road to leaving the European Union so that at the end of 2020, after the transitional arrangements, both Alison and I can have a drink of champagne in the Strangers Bar, celebrating our independence.
I don't think I will, Nigel.
I'll buy.
Actually,
I'll buy.
No, thanks. That's fine.
But that was clear.
But, you know, I'm sorry, but the issue of Northern Ireland, we're absolutely no further on than we were before. In order to not have an effective border, we need to be in a single market. And you know, the government is not at all dealing with that issue.
Right, do you agree? Yes, you come in, I must go.
Just on this, because Alison is saying, unless we stay in the single market, well, even Jeremy Corbyn isn't offering that. They're looking at some sort of fudged customs union, whatever that happens.
Do you accept that would make it easier to solve the Irish and Northern Irish question?
We're not going to do that.
Yeah, but would it make it easier?
No, we're not going to do it. We are leaving the single market, we're leaving the customs union, but we've already said, Theresa May has said, there is going to be no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland.
Do you agree with Alison McGovern on this point? About that border, that hasn't yet been resolved. It is being kicked further down the road. And by doing so, does it increase the chances of a solution being found or not?
Well, there are two bits to that. I do agree with Ali on the fact that if you're not in the single market and the customs union, it is almost impossible. No one has come up with a way of avoiding a border. Now, the government talks about technology, but remember, the agreement doesn't just say no border. It says no physical infrastructure. Now, technology means cameras, which is physical infrastructure. No one has come up with a way of removing that border short of single market and customs union membership yet. So that is still very much open to discussion. I suspect what the government want to do is play chicken with the Irish, in a sense. They want to drag this out for as long as possible because the Irish have two problems. One, they don't want a border, but two, they want to continue trading with us. And the government wants to push the border issue into the trade talks.
But Anand, is that the European Union wanted to put the cart before the horse, and when you do that, it's amazing the cart doesn't go really all that far. What we need to do is to deal with the UK-EU border, and if we get that right, which we want to do a trade deal with them, and now we can get on with that, then the whole problem between Northern Ireland and Ireland disappears.
It certainly doesn't, I'm afraid, because, you know, the idea that a trade deal gets rid of these issues is just wrong. You know, we would need to have full regulatory convergence, and the only way to do that is a single market. And for people who think this is like a non-issue, which seems to be what's being alluded to here, I just ask, put yourself in the shoes of someone who's my age, who's Northern Irish, who's grown up having, you know, identity that looks both ways, who's grown up with peace, and imagine how this discussion feels to them of people dismissing concerns about the Northern Irish border. I think that's really, really unfair.
All right, just one thing. Are you going to join Jacob Rees-Mogg when he goes on that boat and to discard the fish?
Joe, I'm not so sure my sea legs are that good to be going up and down on a trawler on the Thames, throwing fish fingers into the Thames. No, it's not jubilati quite for Jacob Rees-Mogg, but it's semi-jubilati.
Thank you for that. Now, for more reporting and analysis of Brexit, check out the BBC News website. That's bbc.co.uk/Brexit. Now, for the last couple of years, new dads have been entitled to take more time off work when their baby is born, sharing parental leave with their partner. But a report out today from the Equalities Select Committee says very few men are actually taking it. It argues the government should be doing much more to encourage fathers to stay at home, including increasing paternity pay, I should say. Elizabeth Glinker has been to meet one dad who has chosen to take time off with his young children.
Well, shared parental leave is something that's been available to dads here in the UK since 2015, but the latest figures show that only between 2 and 8% of fathers are likely to take that up. We've come here to South London to see Michael and his two daughters, Milda and Atena. Hello. Hello. And Michael is a stay-at-home dad. Michael, what do you make of these figures? Why do you think so few dads are taking up the opportunity of having time off with their children?
I think it's a difficult decision to make because there are still a lot of barriers, both cultural and economic, to deciding to really take time off for your kids.
What difference has it made to you having time off with the children?
Well, I think it's been great for me. It's really brought out a lot of different aspects of my personality. I've learned to be more patient and more caring as a person. And for the kids, I think that I've managed to develop a much closer relationship with them over these last couple of months.
And when you tell people that you are a stay-at-home dad, how do they react to that?
I get different types of reactions. A lot of times people commend me, but I think that that's also kind of strange because you would never commend a mother for staying home and taking care of her children. And other times people just are a little surprised that I've decided to take a year off of my professional activity to watch my children.
So what do you think would make a difference in terms of encouraging more men to actually do what you're doing?
I think that if we're really, as a society, looking for pay equality and for equality, gender equality in general, we need to start at home as well. So I think that the government could make some efforts to ensure that all fathers are paid and enjoy longer paternity leave. But I also think that it's a question that should be addressed in the family and in the home.
Okay, Michael, thank you very much, and thank you, girls. Should we wave back to the studio? Do you want to wave? Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Good try, Elizabeth. Mind you, they were very well behaved there, weren't they? Maria Miller chairs the Equalities Select Committee and joins us now from Central Lobby inside Parliament. Maria Miller, welcome to the programme. Take-up of the government's shared parental leave policy is as low as 2%. Does that surprise you?
Well, it does on one level when you look at the fact that more than half of new dads want to be able to spend more time with their children and actually are talking about even down trading their jobs to be able to do that. So the low take-up of shared parental leave, I think, really shows that, you know, families have modernised in this country far more quickly than the workplace has.
Yes, I mean, but does it mean it's a failure, the policy?
I think it's a policy that needs review, and the Select Committee report that we've published today tells the government exactly how they should review that by firstly giving dads 90% of pay for their parental leave that they give, their paternity leave that they have for 2 weeks shortly after the birth of the child, but then having 12 weeks protected time for dads during the first year of a child's life to make sure that dads actually take that. It's a use it or lose it, which we know works really effectively in other countries to change the culture and get dads to take this sort of leave rather than, have to say, just continuing in the old ways.
Right, and just to clarify, would they get paid the 90% of their earnings during that time?
Well, at the moment we haven't got a full costing for that. We want government to look at it as part of their review of their policies on shared parental leave, but we certainly believe they have to be paid more than they currently get under shared parental leave, because as your interview has just said, you know, that's one of the reasons why dads are not taking up this important part of their children's lives.
Yes, and no doubt the take-up would be higher if the policies, as you've just explained them, get put into force. But are companies signed up to this idea of losing members of staff, key members of staff, for that length of time?
Well, what we're hearing now from larger companies who perhaps are looking at this in more detail is that they are equalising the support they give to mum and dads to allow dads to have more paid leave at full or partial full wages. But, you know, I'm not sure the country can really afford to ignore this, because we've got so many new dads who are saying that they could down trade their jobs, leave the labour market, and if the government really wants to tackle the gender pay gap as one of their main flagship policies, they won't really effectively tackle that until they've tackled the issue of dads taking up more of those caring responsibilities, particularly in the first year.
Do you think the government is committed enough, though, to doing those things, to closing the gender pay gap and actually helping dads stay at home who have newborn kids? Because actually, although these proposals are better on the face of it, are they really radical enough to actually reverse the sort of gender roles in the way they are set?
I think they're radical enough to get dads to really think again about their role in their children's lives and their ability to take time off, particularly if they're low paid. But, you know, the most important thing the Prime Minister said recently on this topic is that she's supporting flexible working from day one and wants to see businesses take that. And that, of course, would really benefit not only dads but also mums as well, who often fail to get the sorts of good quality jobs they need to get back into the labour market and get rid of this dreadful gender pay gap that still blights the lives of women over the age of 35. So I think there are very positive noises coming from the government, and I hope this Select Committee report today will give them further food for thought.
Maria Miller, thank you very much there in Central Lobby. Well, here in the studio, we've been joined by John Adams, who runs Dad Blog UK, and by Kate Andrews from the Institute for Economic Affairs. Welcome to both of you. What do you think of the proposals in the way Maria Miller just explained them?
I'm actually very much in favour of the majority of the proposals. I think the one on shared parental leave is a little bit confusing. I'm not sure whether the committee is actually proposing that we do away with shared parental leave.
Well, the implication seemed to be that actually if you overhaul the system in the way that she says, you have 12 weeks paid leave, that you would somehow abandon shared parental leave. Would you be in favour of that?
No, I think it's a bit too soon to abandon shared parental leave. But I think the important point is that where other nations have introduced shared parental leave, and if we look at Sweden, for instance, and Iceland, two very good examples, where they've introduced ring-fenced leave for fathers, or standalone leave for fathers, is to use the committee's language.
Yes.
What you've got is you've had much greater male participation domestically. You've then had the result of much greater female participation in the workforce and sort of greater gender equality all round. It does come at a cost of business, it has to be said, but it does work better for society.
But a price worth paying for the benefits to society and allowing men to stay at home in the first few months of their children's lives.
The goal of public policy should not be to get some equal split between men and women doing the exact same thing. It should be to give partners the freedom to choose what is right for them in their own home, whether that be the woman staying home most of the time, the man choosing to do it. Regardless, it should be a free choice, and our goal should be to make that as flexible as possible. In terms of paternity pay, I actually support the decision to increase it because small businesses won't be terribly affected by that. They can reclaim most of those costs, if not all of those costs, from the government. That's a cost of the taxpayer, but it might be something we want to prioritize and look at that in a separate discussion. I'm much more concerned about essentially required dad leave. This is the government saying, if you don't make the decision we want you to make in your personal home, we're going to come in and threaten, as the MP said, to use it or lose it, to threaten your benefits, to threaten your time off if you don't do what we want. That is much more concerning. And in countries like Sweden, where it's been tried, they've had real problems getting men to take that up. They still don't have a 50-50 split because it doesn't seem like that's what the majority of families want to do.
Right. Do men actually want this? Would it work, this use it or lose it?
Yes, I think... I think Kate's right. We're not getting to 50-50. And I think the other point where Kate's absolutely right is we shouldn't really be looking at having this great world where childcare is shared 50-50 or mum and dad work part-time each. It's got to be what's right for each individual family. And what these proposals will do was create flexibility so that families could choose what was right for them. And there are barriers in place at the minute that stop men from fulfilling their, or really showing their abilities as carers for children within the family unit. I think it does. There is a track where this policy has worked. I do sort of get what Kate's saying. It may sound heavy-handed, but it's a case of changing working culture.
And will it do that, do you think? I mean, isn't that the key here, that until the working culture changes, then you're not going to get the flexibility that Kate's talking about?
Yeah, and I agree with Kate's reservations, but I think the key is what Maria Miller said about changing culture, and that's why you're adopting this sort of approach, because in the workplace at the moment, it is still, I think, in some places considered a bit odd that the dads are going to do this. And so introducing the system, I think, is a way of bringing about a cultural shift, which is necessary, because you don't have free choices if your employers are inherently biased.
We do have such a problem, and I respect you so much for making the decision to stay at home, and I think hopefully the future generations will move in that direction. I agree with you completely, but
they haven't done it so far, have they? And is that because the law isn't favouring them and the culture isn't changing quickly enough?
You don't change culture, at least not in a meaningful way, by bringing in heavy-handed policies to force people to do something that might not be right in their individual circumstance. So increasing paternity pay, making it easier for men to take time off work is great. That's one thing. But coming in and saying everyone has to do it this way is what I'm very uncomfortable with.
What are the challenges you face, though, as being a stay-at-home dad at the beginning? Because, I remember when I was off on maternity leave, you didn't really see very many men at all at the play groups and the toddler groups. Is it difficult?
Oh, it is, yes. I always think that the biggest issue is actually social isolation. And the issue you have is that women will very often, from before their child is born, they'll be socialised with NCT or parent craft friends, and that will carry on into nursery. And as a stay-at-home dad, you don't always become a stay-at-home dad from day one because mum is breastfeeding. Very often men become stay-at-home dads because of redundancy or some other circumstance. So they are then parachuted into these circumstances where they're meeting with women where these tightly knit social groups are already formed. And you have to make your way in with them. And what is sad, I think, is I've seen it with my own daughters. They get socially excluded because the mum's kids will socialise with each other, but yours don't.
Right.
That's the saddest part for me.
Yeah, I mean, that is a real shame, isn't it? Because actually for men who would like to stay at home and they hear these sorts of stories, which are true, from personal experience and talking to others, it's going to put men off, never mind about some of the cultural practices at work.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, as the guest in the TV clip said before, this really starts in the home. And men and women need to have some very serious conversations about how they want to raise their kids. Mom and dad are equal. And we want to see them doing similar roles, whether that be at work or in the home. But, you know, I think women need to be a bit stronger about this and have serious and frank conversations if they have a male partner to say, you know, it's not just going to be on me to do the housework and to raise the kids. And men, you know, I think are becoming more and more receptive to that, which is really positive.
Just final issue on the gender pay gap that Maria Miller talked about. She says that actually some of these moves will help deal with the gender pay gap that she says blights the lives of so many women over the age of 35. Do you agree?
Well, I think if you equalise between the genders in terms of who's looking after the kids, then yes, absolutely, because one of the reasons for the gender pay gap is that women disproportionately look after the kids at home, and that has impacts on their career and on the pay structure thereafter. So yes, I'd imagine it would.
Right, do you agree?
Well, the main reason that there is a gender pay gap is really a motherhood pay gap. I agree with that. Many of those figures are badly distorted, so you're not actually comparing like for like, but if you are going to tackle it, you're going to do it by having more women pursuing the same career trajectories as men.
All right, thank you both very much. Later today, Labour will confirm who will be taking over as the party's new General Secretary. Our political correspondent Ian Watson is across the story. Why should we care about who the new General Secretary is, Ian?
Well, I think there's two reasons, actually, Joe. First of all, this is hugely symbolic because we're having two female candidates competing for this role. There will only be the second female General Secretary Labour has had, Christine Blower, who used to be in charge of the NUT, and Jenny Thornberry from the Unite Union. The second reason is also that both of them are actually on the left of the party. So symbolically, this shows just how the party is shifting towards those who support Jeremy Corbyn's leadership and how the party machine will be effectively in the hands of those around his leadership, whoever wins. But certainly the favoured candidate is Jenny Thornberry from Unite. She's a close political and personal ally of Len McCluskey, the General Secretary of that union, the biggest funder of Labour. And I think she will actually bring about some changes to the Labour Party. She'll be normally in charge of around 400 staff, but she'll also be working in tune with the Labour leadership and the Labour leader's office, perhaps a lot more so than the previous incumbent who was selected under Ed Miliband. And some of the areas that she's going to be looking at, for example, is how to change the way that the party campaigns, using some of the techniques that successfully got Jeremy Corbyn elected and re-elected as Labour leader, using those more widely on behalf of the Labour Party. Just talking about doing more grassroots campaigning as well if she's chosen later today. But one of the other reasons that we should be watching closely is she's also going to be the person who implements what's called the party's democracy review, and it could change the way that the Labour Party operates, again giving more power to the members, shifting the balance of power away from some of the party's MPs. So she could be a highly influential figure over the next few years.
Explain to us why a number of Labour staffers walked out.
Yes, some key staff left yesterday, 6 of them, but before that, of course, the outgoing General Secretary, before that, the person who's in charge of the party's elections and campaigns. So some big losses to the party, most of them are leaving over the next few months, and certainly in some cases, I think they felt that they were far more in tune with the previous regime than the likely regime under somebody who is firmly on the left of the party, closely connected, as I say, to the Unite Trade Union. Some of those who are leaving felt a lot more comfortable under previous Labour leaders. Some of them had worked for not just for Ed Miliband, but also for Tony Blair and for Gordon Brown as well. But this also, of course, gives the person coming in, as I say, likely to be Jenny Thornberry, gives her quite a big room for manoeuvre in reshaping the party machine, reshaping the backroom role of the party, more in the image of those who have supported Jeremy Corbyn's leadership all along.
Ian Watson, thank you very much. Well, we've been joined in the studio to talk about this by the Labour backbencher and supporter of Jeremy Corbyn, Chris Williamson, and by Margaret Prosser, a Labour peer and former president of the TUC. Welcome to both of you. Margaret Prosser, first of all, do you have any reservations about the outcome of this election?
Well, I've got a lot of reservations about the way the whole thing has been organised. In a way, you could describe the General Secretary of the Labour Party as being the civil servant of the organisation. Obviously, it's a political party. Obviously, the General Secretary is going to be a person with a political background, political membership. We understand that. But that person has to slightly stand above the fray. Now, the way this has been conducted, as soon as a vacancy was announced, it was almost immediately announced by senior people within the party, senior members of Parliament, that Jenny Formby would be a really good candidate. Now, there is a person specification for this job. There's an application form, there's an interview process, there are other candidates. How is it that the leadership of the party has decided who they want before any of that process has been conducted? Now, they may say they have a preference. Quietly, they may say that, but public announcements just puts the whole thing into some kind of a shambles. I mean, it just is really not fair.
How has the leadership, why has the leadership done that for a post that is supposed to be, Margaret Prosser says, above the party political fray?
Well, first of all, it's not an election, it's an appointment by the National Executive Committee.
Yes.
And the leadership, doesn't appoint. It's the National Executive Committee who will appoint.
But should they have expressed such a firm preference for Jenny Formby?
Well, I'm not sure that Jeremy has expressed any preference one way or the other. In the end, it's a matter for the National Executive Committee. And we're very fortunate that we've got two incredibly talented candidates who I think will serve the party incredibly well. And as Margaret said, they are effectively the civil service of the Labour Party. The Labour Party is a flourishing party now. It's very much in tune with the British people, and we're going to have now a new General Secretary who will help to ensure that we, implement Labour's programme, throughout the membership of the party and help to, mobilise this mass movement that the Labour Party is now to actually ensure that we carry Jeremy over the threshold of number 10 when the general election comes and that we reach out more and we involve even more people in the party. That's got to be a good thing.
Do you accept Chris's point that actually Jeremy Corbyn didn't express a preference in the way that you thought?
Well, actually, I think everybody around him has expressed the preference. And, of course, it's an appointment. That's my point about there being a person,
election, not appointment.
A person specification and an application form and everything. But the whole view has been that Jenny Formby is going to be the right person for the job. I've known Jenny since the early 1980s. She's a very capable woman. Whether or not she's right for this position would be a matter of another discussion. Perhaps.
What do you think? Do you not think she is right?
The party is split down the middle at the moment. And I have to kind of remind everybody, just because I'm not a Corbyn fan does not make me a right-winger. I have never in my life been a right-winger. I'm quite on the progressive left of the party. Loads and loads of people who express themselves to be on the left are actually quite reactionary in many ways.
And do you feel you are being described as a right-winger then by
well, of course,
the likes of Chris?
Well, if you're a Blairite, my goodness, you might as well go, hide yourself away. I mean, it's a pathetic way of describing what's going on in the party. And we need somebody in that General Secretary position who's going to be able to bring people together. Right, this is not going to happen.
Do you accept that it is split in the first? Do you accept that the party is split? Well, that's Margaret Prosser's perception. And Margaret's saying she's not, as some in the party describe, a right-winger, a Blairite, which is seen now as a very derogatory term. Do you accept that that is now the current state of the Labour Party?
I don't accept that the party... I mean, Margaret said the party is split down the middle. I absolutely disagree with that. In fact, I've been a member of the Labour Party now for 42 years. I've never known it to be more united. Yes, there is a handful of people who... Well, no, it's true. There's a handful of people who don't like the direction of travel. But in the end... Well, no, I'm sorry, it's not. I mean, there's a few people in the Parliamentary Labour Party, but the Parliamentary... Well, hold on a second, Margaret. The Parliamentary Labour Party is not the Labour Party. I've made that point on numerous occasions. We are now a party of around 600,000 members. Overwhelming support for it. And the other important thing, Joe, is that Labour's programme that we put to the country last time, that we're kind of developing now,
is very much in tune with the overwhelming majority of the British people. Let's just remember that. So we are incredibly moderate and mainstream. That's the Labour Party now. Plain common sense is what we're offering.
Do you welcome this move to allowing the members to have much more say? And do you agree with Chris Williamson that the Parliamentary Labour Party is not the Labour Party?
I, of course, welcome a move to engage more and more people. What I don't welcome is the way in which this is being organised, because we do have loads of people engaged with Momentum who are also members of other parties.
No, that's not true, Margaret.
Well, it is true. We know it's true because all the research has shown that it's true.
I'm sorry, that's not true.
No, the Constitution doesn't allow it, but it's
exactly.
not. But
nobody can be a member of Momentum unless they are a member of the Labour Party. Momentum have done an incredibly fantastic job at the last election, mobilising young people, and actually enabled us to get the increase in vote share since 1945.
That was not what I said. What I said was...
Let her answer.
Well, you said that without me moving my lips.
He's a very clever man, Chris. Right, go on, Margaret. You do.
Margaret had just said that.
What I said was there are many, many people in Momentum who are also members of other parties. Well, the research has shown that that's the case. Secondly, if the vast majority of people in this country agree with the current position of the Labour Party, how come we didn't win the election? I absolutely accept that the manifesto met the grievances and the upsets and the awful situations that many, many people find themselves in. Where I kind of differ with as we go along that path is who is going to deliver that programme for us, because I have no faith that the current leadership would be able to do that.
Well, I mean, as I say, we had the biggest increase in vote share since 1945.
But you didn't win. But you didn't win.
And the reason why I believe we didn't win was that there was a view abroad, and certainly that was true, I think, of the party head office, of the fear that because we were a very long way behind in the opinion poll, so it's kind of understandable, and they were fighting a defensive campaign. I think if we fought more of an offensive campaign, then, we would have actually got over the line.
You thought the Labour Party was fought a defensive campaign?
No, I think that the party head office, as it were fighting a defensive campaign.
Because
they were putting resources.
Let me just ask one final question.
We were trying to shore up and not actually being as offensive as I think we could have been.
Given the opposition in the election was the Conservative Party, who fought the worst campaign on living memory.
And we fought the best campaign in living memory.
And we still didn't win. So anyway, leave all that aside. The fact of the matter is that the leadership of the administration of the party needs to be a person to bring everyone together. And you may take the view that the party's not split down the middle. I think that that's complete and utter tosh, Chris, frankly.
Well, I go all over the country, and I can assure you that in all the meetings I go to, there is huge support for the agenda that Jeremy is spearheading.
Chris, we've got to finish the discussion. You won't agree on that, which is fair enough. We will find out later, of course, or have that appointment confirmed. The Labour Party are saying that staff haven't walked out in the way I quite expressed it. They are working their 3-month notice period, but they are leaving. So we can argue about semantics, but they are leaving as a result of the way that this is handled. And you may say that is because that's what always happens when there is a change of the guard. Thank you both for joining us. Now, later this afternoon, a mother and her 6-year-old son will be heading to Downing Street to present a petition calling for him to be granted a special licence to use medical cannabis. Alfie Dingley has a rare form of epilepsy and can suffer as many as 30 seizures a day. Well, our reporter Greg Dawson is live at College Green with Alfie and Hannah now. Greg.
Thank you, Joe. Yes, 380,000 signatures on that petition, which will be presented to Number 10 this afternoon. It's all about this boy, 6-year-old Alfie Dingley. He's enjoyed his day in Parliament today. He's even been given a red bus, which he's loved rolling around College Green here. His mother, Hannah Deacon, is with us. Hannah, just tell us a bit more about Alfie's condition, please.
Alfie has a very rare condition. There's only 9 boys in the world with PCDH19. It's a genetic condition. It's extremely rare. There's no understanding about how to treat it, and it's very aggressive. And he's had a very, very difficult time since he was a little baby.
You have taken him to the Netherlands where he was treated with cannabis oil.
Yeah.
Just talk to me about the differences that you noticed.
Before we went to Holland, Alfie was in hospital every 4 to 10 days with a severe cluster of seizures, needing up to 5 doses of intravenous steroids, plus lots of rescue medicines and anti-epileptics. He had tonic-clonic seizures, where he went purple, incredibly frightening. We would always need an ambulance to get to hospital. We lived like that for 18 months, and it's the most horrendous thing that we've had to endure. It was just awful. And our doctor said to us, if we carry on the way we were, that Alfie would become very sick, possibly get psychosis, or his organs would fail and he could die. So we had no choice. We took him to Holland.
And you noticed a huge change?
Yeah, I mean, once he was put on the THC as well as the CBD oil, he had 1 seizure a month. He had 1 dose of steroids a month. He had a happy life. He noticed his sister. He played with her. We had family days together, which were normal, and we hadn't had that for a long, long time, and it was just a miracle for us. And we wanted to replicate that in the UK with our family and with our friends and with our jobs, and try to get back to some sort of normality.
Now, at the moment, Alfie cannot have that cannabis oil in this country. He had a seizure last week, given more steroids, and naturally he becomes quite aggressive, and that is difficult for you to manage.
It's horrendous. I get no help other than from family. He had a seizure on Monday night. We had to rush him into hospital, and then he carried on having seizures again on Tuesday night. So he had 2 doses of steroids. And this is what he does to me. If you look at my hands, this is what he does. He's aggressive. He is angry. I'm frightened. I can't leave him alone with his sister. It's horrendous. He couldn't go to school because I can't put him in a situation at school where he might hurt other children. It's no life, and we've gone from having a lovely life in another country to having a horrible life again where, I'm a full-time carer. It's incredibly stressful, it's very upsetting, and it's even more upsetting because I know none of it needs to happen.
Now, the Home Office initially said simply they couldn't let you license this medication in the UK. Now, subsequently they said they would consider a 3-month trial, but they could make no promises. You haven't heard anything since that. That was about 3 months ago. What is your response to this delay?
It's very upsetting. We're getting a lot of platitudes. We're getting a lot of people saying, we understand your situation. They don't. They don't live my life every day. They don't live my son's life every day. We want clarity. We want to understand that they are committed to helping Alfie, committed to helping our family. We want them to make that public, and we want them to help our doctor to prescribe this and get a licence. Without their support and without them driving this won't happen, and it needs to come from them. I'm a full-time carer. My partner is trying to keep a roof above our heads. We're trying to parent our children. It's not my job to do this. It's the Home Office's job to make this happen. And today we want clarity and we want their support publicly.
Okay, thanks very much for joining me, Hannah.
Thank you.
Hannah Deacon and Alfie, who's just over there. A lot of supporters, including Sir Patrick Stewart, who's been supporting Alfie's case. Sir Patrick, just very quickly, we've only got a few seconds, but just outline the reasons you're supporting Alfie's case.
Because it's exceptional and it's urgent, and the longer, wider process of the uses of medical marijuana in the UK will have to be discussed, but this case has extreme urgency attached to it, and I would hope that the Home Office will come to some conclusion in Alfie's favour very, very quickly.
Thank you for your time, Hannah Deacon, Sir Patrick Stewart. Back to you in the studio, Joe.
Greg, thank you very much to you and all your guests there out on College Green. I mean, that case was very powerfully and emotionally put to the Home Office. Do you think, Alan, that they should consider it? They wouldn't do an interview, or they weren't available to do an interview, anyone from the Home Office?
I mean, for me, this is a total no-brainer. Where it can do good, where it can alleviate suffering, you regulate it through the medical system and you use it. I mean, drugs that they prescribe can be dangerous and have side effects, which is the case with marijuana, but I think if there's a clear case when it can alleviate suffering, then actually I don't see the case for not.
I mean, what do you say when they have obviously stalled in terms of a response, even to granting a pilot, even for 3 months, to give some sort of relief to Hannah and Alfie?
Well, who knows what processes go on within ministerial departments. It's not unusual, is it, for things to get stalled in the system, but I think with luck the publicity that this case is now getting will do something to shift the wheels of the Home Office, but I really don't understand why this can't just be done.
Well, and if the Home Office would like to get in touch with the programme, and of course we'd be delighted to talk to anyone from the department to find out if they will make an exception in the case of Alfie. While we've been talking, I have two other bits of news to bring you. First of all, a letter that's been sent by Jean-Claude Juncker, and this is from the European Commission head, congratulating Vladimir Putin on his re-election. In the letter, Mr. Juncker says, "I've always argued that positive relations between the European Union and the Russian Federation are crucial to the security of our continent, and our common objective should be to re-establish a cooperative pan-European security order. I hope that you will use your fourth term in office to pursue this goal, and I wish you every success in carrying out your high responsibilities." Is that appropriate, bearing in mind what we are going through at the moment?
I think the phrase that comes to mind is tone deaf about that. I don't think it's appropriate. And what's interesting as well from the news is that it's Sarah Wollaston who has condemned this. And so
Conservative MPs branded the letter as shameful.
Who a lot of people would have had down as a potential rebel over some of the Brexit votes coming up in the Commons. So it's interesting that it will feed into how people feel about the European Union, this kind of thing.
And very briefly, we were talking about Cambridge Analytica and how data has been harvested at the beginning of the programme. And the DCMS, the Department of Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee, has confirmed it's requested that Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Facebook, appear before the committee's fake news inquiry. Now, there's just time left to find out the answer to our quiz, and that question was, what has Parliament just spent £10,000 on? Is it A, a home cinema for John Bercow's apartment, B, money to stop the trees in Parliament's atrium from falling over, C, a relaxation room for stressed MPs, or D, training for MPs on how to use Instagram? What's the correct answer?
Pathetically excited, because I think I know. I think it's B.
Which were?
The trees.
It is the
Fantastic.
trees. You were right. Pathetically excited or not. Well done. And you don't get to take a tree home, I'm afraid. Believe it or not, the fig trees are costing nearly £10,000 to keep straight. Even without this, the trees cost £20,000 a year as it is to maintain. And this has led to calls for, wait for it, root and branch reform. The Commons has ordered a review into how to keep costs down, leading to speculation the trees could be axed. Boom, boom. However, a spokesman has said the trees in Portcullis House contribute to the building's environmental and acoustic performance, and it's been argued they are essential to keep the atrium cool on sunny days. They've been controversial ever since the beginning, I have to say. I remember when they were brought over. We've been joined in the studio by Freddie Blackett, who runs an indoor gardening company and has come accompanied by a lovely plant. What is it, first of all, the plant?
This is a Howea forsteriana in Latin, or it's quite difficult to remember that. So
it is.
We call him Big Ken instead.
Big Ken, I think that's much better. Do you think fig trees were the right trees for lining the atrium in Portcullis House?
In short, no, I don't really. I think these particular types of figs are native to tropical conditions. And
we haven't had a lot of that recently, have we?
No, exactly right. You know, they're suited to warm, humid, low-light conditions. And as you can see in these images, Portcullis House does not provide at least those light conditions. And, you know, it's that type of space is much better suited to plants like succulents, cacti, palms, rather than these more tropical plants like figs.
Are you surprised, then, that they're also leaning and there are attempts to straighten them?
No, as a result of that, you know, I think there are two things you need to consider when you're buying plants, either for a large space like this or a small one, like a flat or a home, and that is the plant and the space. And if the plant, in this case, a tropical one, is inappropriate for a conservatory essentially, then it's not going to be growing in the appropriate conditions.
But it is surely a lovely thing to have in terms of a working environment. I mean, Portcullis House is where all the politicians and the staff in Parliament sort of gather, and all the services are there. They do add something, don't they, to the working environment?
Absolutely. Yeah, I read this morning that John O'Connell from the Taxpayers Alliance saying that that politicians should be spending more on necessities and less on internal decor. And these aren't just internal decor. Plants, albeit very beautiful things, are also very effective at removing nasty pollutants from the air, at reducing noise, and in creating a greater sense of calm. And all of those things, I think, provide a greater working environment that in turn helps MPs better serve their constituents.
Well, that sounds like a good idea. You can leave the plant here then. It'll help our working environment, I'm sure, here in the studio. Anand, thank you very much for being my guest of the day. Andrew will be here tomorrow for live coverage of Prime Minister's Questions. Bye-bye.
Rugby next on BBC Two with the Super League show.
With the help of a hidden earpiece.
Hello? Look at the camera if you can hear me.
How would it feel to get secret advice in your hour of need?
Hey, if I just want to give you a little advice, before you go do your speech, you're ready for it.
If you put the little fella